Five Nights at Freddy's. This game doesn't need an introduction. FNaF is the largest, most prevalent indie game. Its popularity makes it nearly a household name. So much so that when I was just a wee little lad, I had a Freddy Fazbear posters and shirts and plushies. And I think I had some Freddy shoes at one point. It was honestly a bit much looking back on it, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about the story of FNaF and how it slowly declined into complexity and a bit of comedy, if you ask me. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 through 4 had a story that, while complicated, wasn't impossible to decipher. I'll give a quick rundown of how I interpret this story to get you up to speed. Five Nights at Freddy's is a story within a story, on the surface being about the tragic murders of poor children caused by one man, the so-called Purple Guy. A deranged man who got the most fitting end, being trapped within a suit for eternity, like the souls he killed, only to eventually burn down in a faulty pizzeria, just a shell with a rotting corpse inhabiting it. But this story isn't entirely true. It was all a trauma response in the form of dreams for one child, the unnamed crying child. These dreams are how he copes with a tragic event of his own, the loss of his sister. His brother distracts himself by tormenting him, and his father is growing more cold and distant by the day, getting to the point that he is borderline neglecting his two living kids. These manifest in his dreams where animatronics jump at him while he can only sit helplessly. Children die, and a cold man kills said children. These dreams escalate into true horrifying nightmares after the bite of 83, where his skull gets crushed, and his last moments are an adrenaline-filled mess until his life fades away. Now, I know a lot of what I just said is controversial when considering the current lore, but we're looking at this as if the game stopped at FNaF 4, and I firmly believe that the dream theory was true at this time. That is, at least until the community had an uproar over the theory, which Scott saw, prompting him to pick up the scraps and attempt to turn the story about a child coping with the death of his sister and how his family handles it into an actual story about possessed robots and mass child murder that needed a defined logic to appease the fans. So, as is the natural evolution to this kind of story, we got FNaF World. FNaF World was certainly a departure from the first 4 games, and while I think it turned out to be a fun game on its own, it isn't everyone's cup of tea, and that's understandable. But where this game really gets controversial is, of course, its lore. FNaF World's lore is still not very well understood to this day. The community has revised their understanding so many times that I can't even count the number of interpretations I've seen myself in my time in this community. And then, of course, Update 1.2 dropped and complicated the story beyond repair with its Gray Man ending. The utter confusion this thing has caused is a headache. People can't agree who the Gray Man is, and any answer we get contradicts the rest of the story entirely. It's honestly a mess, and this game would form the cracks that plague the series in its current games, that are desperately trying to glue the pieces back together. Up to this point, everything in Five Nights at Freddy's looked believable for the times they took place in, and established a certain style for the games of old mascot animatronics that were usually furry. Aside from the toy animatronics, who still felt grounded in the world despite their obvious deviations from the furry mascot suit style. Even the nightmares felt grounded, since if we consider Dream Theory to have been canon before the games were, well, squeezed like a wet rag for more lore, then the crying child seeing twisted metal abominations of characters his brother made him fear would make sense. The nightmares weren't supposed to be real at this point, just figments of a child's fear. And then we got Sister Location, a sci-fi mess that still doesn't have a set place in the timeline, filled with killer animatronics that Afton used to gather something you'd only know about at the time from the books. Remnant, the story's mystery soul juice, used to try and explain how ghosts work. Which, let me be honest here, wasn't needed. There were so many questions we had at this time, like the identity of the crying child, who the missing kids were, and of course, what is the hell is going on with the guy who just got a spaghetti puppeting his skin, and how is he alive and walking with no bones? And no, I will not take Remnant as an answer for that, okay? Little bro has no bones, is just sloshing around. Just good, he's just fine, he's just chilling. And to top off the confusion cake that was Sister Location, we have the Entered Office segment, where if you put 1983 into the little keypad, you see cameras in which each major location of FNaF 4, implying that either William was spying on his kid to a pretty extreme degree, or that he was observing the kid deal with the nightmare animatronics, which feels plausible in this lore soup, since why else would he have a camera in the plush trap room? With this game, the cracks spread, and some remnants started to leak out of the holes forming in the story's walls. Pizzeria Simulator. This game somehow took the cracks that the previous games had formed, and mostly did a pretty good job trying to fix them. Some things were still left unanswered, of course, even some big things. But this game tried to tie up as many loose ends as one could with this game franchise, and it even gave our favorite little murderous British boy a real ending. Burned by Henry and tortured in purgatory by a certain angry spirit, as confirmed in the game that was meant to just be DLC, Ultimate Custom Night. Everything wasn't fixed, of course, but the story was salvaged. You see what it? I'm gonna shut up now. In the best way it could have been. If the game stopped here, I wouldn't have made this video. But as all of you know, the games did not stop. Oh, no. We still have 2 book series and 2 more games to go, people. And those cracks that began to form at Sister Location, they are following us. When Help Wanted was announced, it looked like it was going to be the final bang for the series, a nice send-off to the games with a fun VR experience to boot. And then it came out, and the beginning stated that everything we played up to this point was games made by an in-universe indie game dev as a means to cover up real events. Which, by the way, can I say that I feel like current lore just kind of ignores this fact? And it honestly should, because the amount of garbage we can say with the excuse of, oh, well, we don't really know what happened, since FNaF 1 to Pizza Sim was just a video game in lore. Also just mind-boggling, man. Probably not half as bad as what I will talk about later, though. Let us get back on track here. Help Wanted started out with that intro, which already implicates things further in unimaginable ways. But even ignoring that, we still have a glitch trap and whatever he is doing with the mind-controlling garbage. And the fact that the information we had, our best explanation for this, was that William just, casually connected a piece of his soul to a circuit board, letting him escape hell, and is now just a digital virus bunny creature, I guess. We couldn't even try to piece together what was happening at this point. And at this point, the lore was becoming more comical than anything. I mean, really, this one guy who killed some kid in the 1900s was now an immortal digital being after dying on 3 separate occasions? There's jokes in there somewhere, but at this point I'm too tired to find it, man. I haven't talked much about the books yet, have I? But that's kind of because, according to Scott, the Silver Eye trilogy isn't canon to the game story. And honestly, that book series needs a video for itself for me to even attempt to try and decipher it. What I really want to look into is Fazbear Frights. And the most frustrating Goosebumps book wannabes that I have ever read. These short stories can either have nothing to do with the game lore or reveal something major in some cryptic code. It was honestly a coin flip with these things. These damn books brought us Fazgoo and sea bonnies. This is where the lore just started to become a joke to me and many others out there. The games could suddenly say that Gregory was a Fazgoo clone the whole time, and I don't think I would even bat an eye at this point. These books at least were said not to be canon to the game, and instead were there to help explain the game in some ways. Which, I don't know how I'm gonna explain the boneless chicken wing that is Michael with sea bonnies, but, who knows, maybe it's the key. I wouldn't be surprised at this point. Security breach. This messy garbage pile of a game really makes me worry about FNaF. Most of the story was cut out of this thing, leaving us with this half-baked mess. And the main villain of the game appears for 5 minutes and then vanishes for the rest of the game. You'd think this game being a soft reboot would help fix the cracks in the lore, but instead, it worsened the problem and gave us good old Peepaw Afton. This man looks like he's about to crumble into dust at any moment. The fact there is still a suit that could be salvaged after 2 fires is a mystery in of itself. Somehow, this game having no story screwed up the main story more than if it actually tried to have one. Things go from bad to worse when the Tales from the Pizzaplex books started coming out, which have all been but confirmed to be actual stories in the game universe, since we're using them to solve the problems of the game at this rate. And these books even had a character that could technically fix the lore, that being the Mimic! An animatronic created by presumably Henry that could explain everything, not for the fact that the Mimic is a hastily put together solution that we have had no hints to in anything before Security Breach dropped. The Mimic is practically Steelwool's homemade superglue to try and seal the cracks that ended up expanding and making the cracks 10 times worse. And this was all caused because 8 years ago, we didn't like the "it was all a dream" ending. And I'd even mentioned that now FNaF 4 may just be William Nightmare gassing children to experiment on them, because this old British dude couldn't just be a child killer, he had to be a Disney supervillain. I can't speak for everyone, but at this point, I genuinely think I would have preferred if the game's lore ended at FNaF 4's conclusion. A story about a family's coping mechanisms and how it harmed their youngest son's life until the older brother went too far and lost another sibling. Forgive me if this isn't, a popular take, but I feel like that's a much more fitting conclusion. Much more... I'm not sure. I think it would have been better if it ended there. Thank you guys for listening to my rant, and goodbye.